Welcome to Client Success Matters. In today's podcast, I'm joined by John Lyons, an award-winning marketing leader with over 25 years of experience on both the brand and agency side of the marketing world. John has worked with global brands like Deutsche Bank, Manchester United, the Lego Group, helping them achieve their commercial objectives through creative strategies, promotional techniques, and digital innovation. As a co-founder of two successful agencies and now a fractional CMO, John brings a practical and commercially focused perspective to marketing. In this podcast, we dive deep into the nuances of client-agency relationships, exploring what clients really need from their agencies, how to build trust and value-driven partnerships, and the critical role of empathy in understanding client challenges. John shares practical insights on navigating the politics and priorities with client organisations, the importance of aligning agency work with business outcomes, and how small budgets can actually unlock big opportunity. Whether you're an agency professional or a client-side marketeer, this episode is packed with lessons on building stronger, longer-lasting relationships. Let's get into it. So John, you've worked at some big brand names as well as run your own agency. So how have these experiences shaped your view on how agencies can kind of better understand and work with clients?
I think both separately have given me lessons to take on. So having run my own business, I understand the need to make financially based decisions, and I understand that everything has a bottom line impact. So if we're working with an agency to do a thing, or working with any supplier to do a thing, what's that going to cost? What's the outcome going to be? It's not just living in a kind of vacuum. I think the other thing from being client side, even more so, what I learned was actually just how much stuff brand marketers are dealing with on a day-to-day basis, and how little of it is the stuff that agency folk are working on or obsess over. So there's a whole number of things that you just don't consider from the outside, just day-to-day internal politics, finding space on shelf, the things that actually fundamentally really matter, which isn't to put down agency folk, because, from my experience agency side, we're looking to do the best that we possibly can for our clients. But having the greatest idea, let's say for a promotional marketing campaign, only makes any sense if we've managed to get the product on shelf. And those are the real day-to-day issues.
It's funny, isn't it? It's what's urgent, what's perceived as urgent for an agency is not necessarily urgent from a client side. And it's having that empathy, isn't it? Of going, actually, what do they have on their plate? What are their other roles and responsibilities? So when I'm frustrated that they haven't fed back on something that's, delaying the program, think to themselves, why? Where are they at? What's their role right now? Maybe they're in planning. Maybe they, that there's having a restructure within the business. It's that sort of empathy piece, isn't it?
Absolutely. And kind of, where possible, offering a shoulder of support, because ultimately you're not only will it make working with the client better, it will make the business better, because you'll be a trusted advisor more than someone just trying to sell in. But the other thing I think is that you need to allow an out. I've been sort of in the position where either a client has agreed something verbally but not signed off, so we're sitting there waiting to bill, which particularly when you're an agency runner is kind of the main thing, or when a project's at a particular point and you need feedback from the agency and you're not getting anything. There's a whole number of things that can be in play there, and I think probably the one that we least understand is that sometimes they can't give you an answer because they haven't been given an answer. And the machinations and the cogs that turn in particularly big brands, it's huge. I mean, it can be multiple people. So understanding as much as you can about your client, their needs and desires, but where they sit in the organization, how they buy, how they procure, what needs to be signed off where, will make everyone's life a lot easier.
Absolutely. And having those relationships with those other stakeholders really benefits agencies as well, doesn't it? If you're thinking beyond just your day-to-day contact and actually thinking about what does that full organogram look like? Who do I need to be influencing and ensuring that where they're not becoming a blocker for work as well is really important.
Absolutely, 100%. And on the kind of the other side of that coin is, being supportive of your client within the rest of their organization. So you're championing your client because they're championing you. So you're trying to understand their needs and wants. You're trying to give them what they need to get what they think they need, which ultimately is going to benefit all parties. So, I mean, I had a client last year when I was back agency side, and we presented a whole bunch of work, research primarily, to the board and the senior leadership team. And their head of marketing had only just been given a budget for the first time, and so I focused all of my attention on the CFO because I could see that the CEO wanted it doing. But the CFO is the person that had to understand that the marketing manager knew what he was doing, bringing this bunch in, and that what we were going to do together was going to help the business. And I don't think I would have had the insight to do that had I not run a business myself in the past.
For sure. Yeah. It is that thing of client success equals agency success, isn't it?
It is. It really is.
So what do you think are the most common frustrations that clients have with agencies, and how can agencies sort of bridge that gap?
I think probably the biggest one, the single biggest one, is agencies wanting, needing, or expecting the client to do work. More often than not, agencies are being brought in, or any kind of supplier is being brought in to take a problem away. A, because you're an expert, and B, because I don't have time to do it as a client. So when you've got a very needy, for all the right reasons, but a very needy agency, it makes it a negative experience. And so what we need to be doing is making sure that we're doing as much as we can and then asking for feedback rather than giving clients forms to fill out. We need you to do a survey. We need you to do this. We need you to sit through these videos. It's unlikely they're going to do that except in extreme circumstances where they're, I don't know, signing up for a new technical platform or something. But it just takes up too much of the day. And I need you, agency person, to let me do my job, basically. Free me up from doing these things to let me do my job. So I think that's probably the first thing. And I know why it's done, because we need to understand from the client what their needs and expectations are. But I think the way it's done is sometimes a little bit kind of heavy. I think some of the other things are as well, going back to that piece earlier of the priorities, just understanding what there is in the day-to-day role of a brand manager or a senior brand manager or a director of marketing, whatever it is, what the roles and responsibilities are. There was a number that came out of, I think it was Uncensored CMO, where John Evans kind of said that as a CMO, he probably spent about 5% of his time working on agency-related work. And I can vouch for the same for my time being client side. It's just not the priority. It's the thing that you enjoy most normally, because it's the excitement, it's the sexiness, it's outside people, it's clever, it's creative. But as I said before, none of that counts if you haven't got product on shelf, or as I did have one year when I was at the Lego Group, a big ship stuck somewhere in Suez Canal that wasn't able to bring the products that we needed for our Christmas campaign.
So, because that's an interesting point, though, talking about from the perspective of CMO to your day-to-day marketing manager or marketing director, your roles and responsibilities are going to be very different, particularly for a CMO. So with an agency working with a CMO, say you're not working on the day-to-day, what are you expecting to hear from an agency? What are you wanting to see the value? Are you wanting to see reporting? Are you wanting to see proactive strategies? Like, what are you expecting an agency? How is an agency to work with a CMO in an organization?
I think there's probably two speeds to this. There's the hygiene stuff. So you want to know that they're doing certain things. It doesn't necessarily mean that you need to go through a workshop to have them presented to you. But knowing that the strategy is being done, knowing that they're taking the correct steps for whatever kind of work they're doing is important. But ultimately, it's the input and the output. What's the time period? What do I need to put in? And what's going to come out of this? And making sure that the CMO can then tie that to their objectives and key results. So one of the big kind of differences for me, in terms of how brand side and agency side works, is how we judge success. So as an agency, everything's tied to KPIs, key performance indicators, but they're just indicators. Ultimately, as a CMO or as a senior marketer, you're working to OKRs, objectives and key results. There are outcomes and there are objectives. There are numbers that go to this. And the KPIs just kind of build a case for, yes, we're heading in the right direction. So I think there's a difference there in terms of how tied to the bottom line you might be. But that'll also depend on the size of the business.
Yeah, for sure. So it is that business outcome focus all the time, isn't it? It's agencies trying to constantly think about that client success piece again. What are their business objectives? How are you tying the work that you've done and the success that you're doing to the actual business outcomes? That's going to prove the value, isn't it, to the business in terms of your capabilities.
Absolutely. And I think it's always good to ask what are the business outcomes? What's the business case for this? So that we can work back and make sure that our KPIs feed into what you need in order to report to your board. Because unless you're working with a one-man band, and there's lots of them out there, hey, I'm a one-man band. Unless you're working with a one-man band, it's likely, it's always going to be the case that whoever you're reporting into is going to have to report into one or more people, either at their level or senior. So you need to make sure that you're taking care of them, you're taking care of their needs, and you're giving them the information that's making the case that you're doing a bloody good job.
And I suppose that ties into my next question, which was going to be all about how does agencies build those long-term relationships with clients? And I suppose, the first thing's all got to be all down to the fact that you're actually delivering on that. You're delivering on those business outcomes rather than just, as you said before, just ticking a box of like, we've done that KPI, we've hit that KPI. Is there any other things that you can see and that you've seen in your experience that has really helped cement those long-term relationships?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, but to start, I just want to poo-poo on a bit of a myth that agencies have, which is, we need to know the client's business better than they know itself. It's just nonsense. You will never know the client's business as well as they know it. But you should try to understand it as much as possible. So the better you understand your client's role, your client's ambition, I mean this as the client contact, their ambition, their line of command, the decision making, how purchase decisions are made, and what else it might be on their day to day, then you're going to have a much better understanding, and you're going to be a much better agency partner. So, I've always kind of thought, for me, what I want to do is to be an agency partner to my clients. I don't just want to be a service provider or giving a particular campaign. So it's always about understanding, and understanding also not just understanding their issues, but understanding that your job is to take the pain away and to make them look good. And so one of my favorite clients ever. So Laurie Glover, if you're out there listening, I hope you are. I worked with Laurie when he was at a travel company called My Ferry Link, and what was great about him is that he talked to me immediately of business outcomes. And so when I went in to do my presentation to his two seniors, it was all based around what we had worked out it could be. And we worked very closely together. We've become pretty good friends. We're mates on Facebook. So, and it's one of those things where I don't think either of us would ever have a problem asking the other for a bit of advice around business work or marketing, because you've got to that point where it's beyond just a sale. And I think that's the important thing. And I can't remember where this came up. I was talking to someone recently about trust in brands. And the example that came to my mind, and this is going off on one slightly, but the example that came to my mind is one of my local garages that I've been into a couple of times. Every time I go in there, they find a non-expensive way of solving my problem and refuse to take any money and send me off. I'll be going back there the minute I have a problem that needs money, because they've built up trust.
It's fundamental, really, isn't it, to everything? And I think that's a really good point, though, that you mentioned there, and I've experienced that myself. When you get to a point with working with your clients where they are really getting you involved in that planning process, really understanding what their measurements of success are, what the business outcomes need to be. When you're in that, the transparency it changes the relationship completely, doesn't it?
100%.
When you get to that trust level where they're sharing all of that, it just makes the working relationship so much easier for the agency to understand how they can support and help the client. And then the client then has the trust to know that you're going to deliver on what they actually need. And I think it's a two-way street, isn't it? It's for both, not just the agencies to be able to make sure that they're doing that, but clients need to give agencies the right information, the transparency, the openness, because the more they share, the easier it then is for the agency. So I know, we talk a lot about what can the agency do, but it's definitely the role and responsibility of the client as well, isn't it?
Yeah, no, totally. And, there are times that you'll find a client that just isn't going to give.
Oh, for sure.
And in those cases, you've just got to kind of, bite it and do the best work that you can do.
Mm.
But so I think, yes, there is a requirement, but I've probably seen more intransigence on the agency side than I have the client side.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's genuinely just because they don't understand that most of actual marketing isn't promotion. There's
Mm-hmm.
4 Ps, and in-house marketers are dealing with not just all 4 Ps to some extent. They're dealing with politics. They're dealing with timeframes. Sometimes they're just dealing with very slow-moving vehicles, if you like. So, as an example of that. So years ago, at one of my old agencies, my greatest ever client win was we pitched and won the Lego Group. Dream for me. I started life as an architect. I was obsessed by Lego as a kid, and as a marketer, I've always loved it as a brand. And so winning the Lego Group as a client was fantastic. And we were working on this digital experience that was kind of personalized data. So it's kind of everything that's happened in Lego in your lifetime. Really, really nice thing, and kind of delivered out in kind of customized prints. And we were excited, and we were working on it for about 18 months or so. And it just never got any further for a while. And I ended up leaving that agency, but staying in touch with the client. And it just never managed to make it into a priority. And I kind of saw my baby, my baby's never going to be born. It's sad. But then I ended up at the Lego Group, and I got given that project. So my own project, my own best-selling ever, was now my responsibility to make live. And I never made the time for it. I never managed to get it live. And, I had a day job to do. I had Black Friday, Cyber Monday, obviously we're in that period now. I had the holiday season. I had other tent poles to deal with. I had, as I said before, stuff getting trapped in the sewers. And so, my own greatest ever idea and bestseller as an agency marketer, I wasn't able to put live as the client. And sometimes that's just the reality.
Mm-hmm.
And it's sad, but it's that gave me more perspective than anything else.
Yeah, totally. I remember when I went over to Fujitsu, and to see the pace, there's a completely different pace. There's a completely different hierarchy of approvals. You have to put business case together to get budgets. You get your budget, and then they suddenly change the direction in terms of the product focus. And so it just gave me such insight into clients' lives, and actually made me go, God, that makes so much more sense as to why my frustration in being in an agency when suddenly my project gets stopped, or they suddenly change direction in something, like being able to see it from the other side of the table, I was able to go, okay, yeah, now I really understand that. And it's that empathy piece again we talked about earlier. Yeah. The more you understand that, as not just from client services perspective, but from a business and agency perspective, because you see it time and time again in agencies where founders or CEOs are getting frustrated with client services not closing projects, or projects delaying and things like that. And it's like there are certain things that we have no control over. And one of those things is how clients choose to feedback on things, whether whether the program is going to progress or not, whether that that brief that you got given is actually going to come to fruition. There is just none of that. So coming back to that piece where, if you can have a client that you've got such good, open, transparent communication with, that they can give you and quite freely give you insight into what's happening, it makes life so much easier. Whereas if you just have that very transactional relationship, you're not going to get that insight, are you?
No, 100%. And, when it's purely transactional and the only answer they've got for you is the same answer that they had for you last time you were chasing, they're less likely to respond. Exactly. And there's always the risk that, particularly if you're trying to sell something in rather than kind of close something off, there's always the case that people are human. They'll just end up feeling embarrassed and not do it or go somewhere else in the first place. So I think it's incumbent on agency people to not chase too hard, particularly when it's not ultimately their sign-off. So, what I've tended to do over my agency career is, firstly be very, very mindful of time and the kind of cadence of chase-ups that you are still chasing up. But always kind of go in with an out, as in totally understand if you're tied up with X, Y, and Z, or is there anything I can do for you to help you speed up this or to help you kind of get through this? And that tends to open the conversation a little bit more than, have you signed this yet? Crack whip.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's helping them as much as possible, isn't it, in getting the information that you need. So look, if we go back to the time when you were in the CMO role, and obviously taking into consideration you come from an agency background as well, and that every agency wants to get into a client if there's the opportunity and grow. What would you say is the best strategies, having seen both sides of the table, in doing that? Is it all about building senior stakeholder relationships? Is it all about how you present it? Is it all about cost efficiencies? Like, where do you see the easiest and quickest ways for agencies to grow within clients?
I think relationship first, and it needn't be with senior leadership. Again, looking at the size of the business, there's probably going to be varying degrees. So I did a bit of research recently in the cybersecurity industry, and found that most cybersecurity vendors were trying to speak only to the chief information security officer. Now, what I know from doing a little bit of looking around is they don't have the time for this. So all of these people are wasting their time trying to speak to the right person. Speak a step or two down. Those are the people who know the jobs that need to be done and can make the case and get sign off on the budget. So I think being very clear about who you deal with, and ultimately you're going to want to move up the food chain. Of course, that doesn't mean that you leave behind your original contact, but doing it well enough that their colleagues in other teams come in. And again, this is something that we did when I won Lego Group as a client. We then ended up working with 2 or 3 different teams, got to know the director in charge of the whole system that we were working within, which made future upsells easier because he knew that we could do the job. But it wasn't a case of let's go in and play golf with the CMO, because do you know what? I think I only ever saw, when I was at Lego Group, I think I only ever saw the CMO once in the flesh. So, they're very, very busy people.
So dependent on the size of organization, isn't
Really?
it? It really is. You're talking enterprise level, give up. You're talking enterprise level CMO wants to talk to enterprise level CMO, like true, genuine peer-to-peer. You're not going to get anything there. So it is, isn't it? It's, you have to think about the size of the organization, where those stakeholders sit within that. The marketing director of a region or something, actually your senior person rather than
exactly that.
Your CMO.
Exactly that. So, when we started working with the Lego Group, our direct client was a senior manager in the loyalty program in the retail team. So there's various chains of command there, but he was able to kind of get verbal sign off on still pretty decent sized budgets. So, understanding how each client business works is important. And, but also understanding the unseen people in kind of the purchase process. So there may well end up being procurement, and they've got totally different needs. Or, the CFO is coming across from a totally different angle. So, if you're selling into a marketer and you're going, yeah, we want to do this and we want to do that, the market might go, yeah, that's great. gets to the CFO, who says, okay, well, see what you want to do here, get them to do it cheaper and on better terms. And, kind of knowing that all that's coming up is really, really useful. So, the more you understand about an organization and your client's part in it, the better. And I think some of my best client relationships when I was in agency were with not necessarily junior, but with brand managers, at most senior brand managers, not necessarily with marketing directors or CMOs, but with people who were ambitious and who were able to rely on my knowledge, having run a business and run a marketing business at that, to kind of help them grow their own careers. And that I think has always been really important. And I look back now, some of my peers, some of the people that I know in the industry, were junior to me, and they're now kind of in really big positions, and I'm still a trusted ear. So I think it's useful to do that. Absolutely.
Oh, absolutely. And that's the importance of, we talked a lot about understanding your client's business, but understanding the drivers for your key contact is so important. Actually, funny enough, I just posted up on LinkedIn a post about client archetypes, really understanding what your client, are they cost driven? Are they relationship driven? Are they creative driven? Like, what is it about them? What drives them? What's of interest to them? And, adapting yourself to that. If you've got someone who's all about wanting to progress their career, can you put them on podcasts? Can you do a webinar with them? Do they want to look really good internally? Can you set up some education sessions with them to make them look good for all of their peers? So really understanding your clients' drivers from a personal and a business perspective. Again, as you say, I'm the same as you. I've got relationships with people that I've worked with 20 years ago, still now, that I could literally go out and have drinks and stuff with them. But that all was because I took the time to understand them. What do they need? How can I help them from a business perspective? How can I help them, be able to, as you said, go up the chain? How can they report back into the business outcomes that we've achieved? I'm helping them do that. Everything that we can do to take away pains and challenges from the client is only going to make the client think you are so indispensable to me.
Oh, absolutely. I couldn't have put it better myself. And not only that, I didn't. So, that's the nail absolutely on the head right there.
Yeah. It is interesting though, isn't it? I do feel so much like that because you're exact same as me, you've both been on client side and agency side. When you've seen the two sides of the table, you just have a completely different way and respect and appreciation for what's happening. And it just changes the way you work, doesn't it? It just completely changes the way that you perceive your clients and the way that you work with your clients. And you really understand much better how to ensure that your agency is actually giving them exactly what they need to, essentially cement that long-term relationship.
Totally that. And one of the things I found in one of the agencies that I co-founded was, so I obviously wasn't on every project, I wasn't on every account, but if something needed correcting, I was the best person to do it. And it became a bit of a running joke with my business partner at the time that if anyone was going to bend over and have to take it on the account of the agency, that was going to be me, because I was good at going in and without spin, just talking about what the issues were and how we're going to get around them and building trust from that.
But that's so much easier. Yeah. And that's so much easier when you've got that relationship though. Yeah. When a client sees the value, builds the trust with you and really believes in what you're saying, when a mistake happens, they are so much more forgiving. They're so much more understanding because they trust the fact that you're going to find the solution to the problem and you work together to do it. If you don't have that, if you're back doing this transactional relationship, it's just going to be an annoyance for the client. The client's going to think, well, why do I want to stick around with you? You haven't done what you said you're going to do, all of that. And, your competitor comes knocking and they go, see you later.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think probably one of my best client relationships was one where So I ran a digital agency at the time, and I'd worked with someone that was involved with this organisation. So I kind of went in with, as a trusted advisor, and they wanted me to review their website and see whether or not they should stay with their current provider. So if I was going to go in and be hawkish, I could have just swung in and went, "This is rubbish. We'll take it away and get on with it." I didn't. I went in, I reviewed it, I advised them that they needed to hold their agency to account on various things, but that what they'd done is in the right direction. And so long as timelines were met, they should stick with that agency. And that earned me so much trust that 3 months later, when it hadn't worked, they came back and just said, "Look, we need to start it all again. Will you do that for us?" And that ended up turning into 2 or 3 pieces of work. And so again, it's one of those where if you can solve the client's problem without it necessarily being something that earns you money or earns you the most money that you possibly can, you're more likely to be trusted. So there's there's an agency I know who they're doing very well. They make a lot of money. They're very niche. People resent working with them, but they do because they do a particular thing that they need.
Right.
And it's a horrible place to be, I think, because everyone else in the industry is, but we know why it's done.
Yeah.
And I don't know of anybody that's kind of that speaks highly of them, and I wouldn't want to be that person. I'd much rather be the kind of trusted advisor, the person that someone can pick a phone up and go, "Look, it's nothing to do with you, but I thought you might have a kind of a view on it. Do you mind me picking your brain? Please do."
100%. I mean, I take that into my own personal work that I do, even for myself, from the years of learning that, is that helping people, giving back, supporting, being, because that does happen. Clients are sometimes just like, "I can't see the wood for the trees right now. I really need someone just to bounce something off. I don't have someone internally that I'm able to do that. Can I just pick your brains? Can I just troubleshoot something with you?" You don't want to be sitting there going, "Well, hang on a second, that's going to be X amount of minutes and I'm going to have to take that off your retainer, or I'm going to have to," if a client thinks of you like that, then you're not going to build that relationship. You're not going to become that, trusted advisor to them, are you?
No, absolutely not. And kind of don't be a lawyer or a cab driver. Not everything has to be on the clock.
No. And actually it made me think about I had another client or ex-colleague of mine who's gone client side, I should say, on the podcast before, and he was saying, it stuck with me quite a lot, which he was saying, don't discount the small budgets, because if you can see the growth opportunity within the account, go for the small budgets and prove your value. And that's a great way to be able to get in there, because I think that there is a tendency for agencies as well to look for the big, shiny, massive amount. And actually, that doesn't it doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to all work out. 2, sometimes you might be pushing yourself too much to get that big, shiny thing, and actually you break that relationship. And 3, there's not so many of them out there. But if you can go for the small little projects, show that you can do everything that we've discussed today, and you build that value and you build that trust with them, then it just opens doors, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. I was just kind of thinking, I wish I'd had this conversation with you about 15 years ago when I went into a client partner relationship that just went totally wrong, and I should have seen it coming, but I was just too keen.
Yeah. What were the key things? What were the key red flags for you?
So I think probably the first thing was that we were asked. So we were a specialist niche agency. We did kind of digital games and campaigns and promotions, and we were told that we would need to manage a live event and PR. Otherwise, they would give, what was my idea, they would give that to an agency that could do all of that. And I'd worked quite hard to regain that client, following a kind of, they had a big buyout, or kind of got acquired, and at that point we stopped working with them. So I'd been working to get back in there for a while, was too keen, should have seen the red flags, and it went badly, and we never worked with them again.
Were you over promising on something that you couldn't deliver on?
It was more the fact that we took responsibility for things that we had no experience of.
Right. Yeah.
So when the live event started going slightly wrong, it was a live online event, and basically what happened was all of the probably 3 or 4G as it was back then, I'm not sure, but all of the kind of mobile comms went down. So the event was no longer online. Absolutely worked our ass off to turn it round. At the end of the day, all the KPIs were good, but the client was sat up at midnight watching this thing happen. It was for a horror movie. He was sat up at midnight watching this thing happen, and just jumped on the phone and just started bawling me out.
Yeah.
And it's never got to work with him again.
Yeah, it's a shame. It's always thinking that, isn't it? Do not fly the plane whilst you're building it.
Yes.
Like, you just, know your skill sets, know your competencies, and stick with them. And if necessary, get the right partners in place for other things. But, I've seen it happen too often where, particularly in tougher times when agencies suddenly go, right, let's just, a client has said that they have a challenge over here. Let's just create something that's going to, fit their challenge right now. We don't have the skills or anything in house, but we'll work it out. It'll be fine. It's never a good thing to do, because reputation is everything, isn't it? And you can have a good relationship, but if you're really just stretching yourself into an area where you really just don't know what you're doing, don't test that out on a client. It's just never going to work.
Once again, Joe. Oh, amen.
And on that note, thank you, John. I love that. It's been really interesting. I think we are very, very aligned in all of our thinking. I think having come from similar backgrounds in terms of our clients and agency, I think that we're very aligned on that. I know there's loads of stuff in here that those that are listening can take away from this and really start to really take just a moment to think, do I have transactional relationships with my clients? Do I have strategic, value-driven relationships with my clients? And if I don't, how do I? And also for the right clients as well, because not every client needs to be strategic, value-driven relationships. Some just are going to be vendor-based relationships.
Yep. Take them and expect no more.
Exactly. Thanks so much, John. I really appreciate your time.
You're welcome, Joe. It's been great. Thanks for talking.